Hi, welcome to my next video on Azure Function Apps. We are going to see what are Azure Function Apps, where it can be used, what are the advantages of using Azure Function Apps, where you should not use Azure Function Apps, along with a demo of creating Azure Function Apps and within which what are the functions or various types of the function you can create. Let's get into the main topic, that is Azure Function Apps. Traditionally, application development required for complex IT infrastructure, which made for a slightly complicated, expensive, and time-consuming affair. In order to build such a complex IT infrastructure, you need to spend a lot of money, you need to spend a lot of effort, and then only you can build a traditional complex IT infrastructure. Here, using Azure Function Apps, you can leverage various advantages, which includes number one, it is simple to create and deploy an app in a quicker time frame. You can use three different ways by which you can create Azure Function App. You can use Azure Portal or a command line interface or Visual Studio to develop Azure function and deploy it into Azure. So it is not a time consuming affair, and you can do it in a matter of a few minutes to few hours of time. Second one, it is a serverless computing environment. The reason is Azure functions can be built over APIs, or it can be built as an webhooks that are triggered by, say for example, HTTP request. This makes it easy to create lightweight serverless APIs that can be used to build microservices and integration with other services. Third one, they are event triggered code, which means it enables the capability to run a script or piece of code in response to a variety of events, and it does not need to run continuously. Fourth important one, it supports for multiple programming languages. They can be written in several languages including C Sharp, Java, JavaScript, Python, and many more. So it supports for multi-programming languages, and it is a programmer choice to pick up the right one. Third one, it supports for pay as you go model, which means if you are consuming the cloud resources cloud resources of various varieties, you need to pay what you are really using it. And so it is beneficial for the organization, and also it saves lots of money. You will be charged for the number of invocations. For example, the number of function invocation or the time of their execution. So which means it is more profitable for the organization, and there is no need for huge capital expenditure. Sixth one, it offers easy integration with other services. Azure functions can be easily integrated with other Azure services such as Azure Cosmos DB, Azure Event Hub, Azure Service Bus, and many more. This make it easy to build end-to-end solution that leverage multiple Azure services. And the last one, it supports for auto scaling. That means it provides auto scaling and billing based upon the usage of the functions, that ensures that developers only pay for the compute resources used by their code. Since it supports for auto scaling, you need not worry about expanding the resources. I mean, either the server compute resources or any other scalable hardware resources. It will be taken care by the cloud service provider automatically. Also note a few more important points with respect to Azure Functions. Azure Function App is a container that can hold many number of Azure functions. It is not one app going to host only one Azure functions. Okay, so an Azure Function App can have multiple number of Azure functions inside it. Second one, Azure function app or functions can be created using Azure Portal or CLI or using Visual Studio or the editor of your choice. Currently, there are only there are only few editor using which you can you can develop your code, build and integrate it. That is, the IDE support is limited to only certain editors, but there are fantastic user interface available, including Azure Portal, Visual Studio. You can use that for various programming languages. The next one is Azure App Service can host a web app or an Azure function. So these are the things that you should have to consider while using Azure function app. Now let's see the major use cases with respect to Azure function app or function that will help you to understand where the Azure functions can be used. The first one is scheduled task and messages. Assume you have a scheduled task and it is triggered on a specific day, time, or on a specific time interval. Upon that, a trigger can be fired that will hook an Azure function to get a business done. Second one, if you are looking for processing a file upon arrival in a specific location, Azure Function App is the right choice. They can do file processing upon certain events, something like a file is dropped it into a FTP location or an FTP location, get that file, process it, and then perform some business action. Third one, it can be used for data or data streams processing. These Azure functions can be used to process and analyze data in real time. This can include tasks such as data aggregation, filtering, and transformation. Fourth one, related to email or email notification and reminders. For example, if you want to send out email or notification to customer after specific steps, for instance, the material is packed and sent for delivery, which are which are complicated in an e-commerce order. Instead of building an entire system with your own infrastructure, you can simply use Azure functions. Fifth one, you can use Azure function to build a quick proof of concept for any requirement. And upon completion of the proof of concept, you can release the resources. Thereby, you can save a lot of cost and you can save a lot of effort in terms of provisioning resources. Sixth one, you can build lightweight web APIs. Please note that Azure Function is not a complete alternative for the web APIs. However, it can be used for performing some simple, smaller steps which are similar to web APIs. Seventh one, computing backend calculations. Usually, Azure functions can be used for doing a very simple, similar, or a kind of relative calculation which are related to backend. You should not go for Azure function apps which involve time consuming, very complex backend calculations such as batch file computation, something like that. So these are some of the use cases or functions that you can think of, while going for Azure functions. And I wish to reiterate the last point, that is running background backup task. These Azure functions can be used to automate tasks that need to run on a regular schedule, such as backups, data imports, and reporting. Now, let's pick up the next topics. That's very important one. Drawbacks with respect to Azure function or Azure function apps. While Azure functions provide many benefits, there are some potential drawbacks that a developer should be aware of, which includes these four items. Number one, resources used by Azure function apps are which are spent whenever there is a function apps are all triggered. That is, the resources are all getting ready or will be made ready when the Azure function apps are all triggered, and is a kind of cold trot strategy, and this leads to latency in application access or application triggering. This can be mitigated by setting always on configuration on the higher tier plans, which is available in higher tier pricing plans. Second one, memory is allocated to Azure function based upon the pricing plan selection, and this leads to a lower memory for a running function sometimes. Since this is a platform as service model, developer has less control over the operating system and the network. Third one, runtime is fully managed by the cloud service provider, and so debugging a function app is not an easy task in the case of debugging the traditional application where you can um, take a control of debugging from one layer to another layer very easily. Fourth important one, Azure function invocations can become expensive since Azure functions are all built based upon the number of invocations and the duration of each invocation. Sometimes it may be either a frequent or long running invocation can quickly become expensive. This can be mitigated by optimizing code for performance and only triggering functions when necessary. What I'm trying to say here is ensure that your code is optimized so that when you run an Azure function, it will take very less amount of time, and so the expense for running such function is will be very less over a period of time. Now, now let's see what are the what are the areas or where Azure function should not be used. Number one, it should not be used for multitasking environment. You can use it for a very simple, straightforward business logic. Second one, please note, as I mentioned earlier, it is not a replacement for Web API. It is that is substituting a set of Azure function apps for an API is not the viable choice. You can do certain business action which is part of a Web API using Azure function and not the entire logic related to Web API. Third one, the function code contains which are too much complicated logic where you should not go for Azure function. Fourth one, using data from a front-end application while saving to and fro from backend databases, you should not go for Azure function. Fourth one, don't go for Azure function when you use when you are trying to use the Azure functions for frequent jobs or frequently used scenarios. And the last one, don't use Azure function for time sensitive scenarios, meaning any error condition leads to a wait period and that create a huge dependency for the work completion, and thereby you will be spending a lot of money in terms of function execution. And so these are the scenarios where you should not go for using Azure functions. Next one, an Azure function app can can host multiple number of functions. As I mentioned, and you have to first create an Azure function app within which you can create multiple number of functions that can do a different task. A function can be triggered by HTTP, or it can be triggered by a message, or it can be triggered using a timer. So an Azure function can host multiple function. In fact, this is one of the main benefits of using Azure function. You can create multiple function within say a single function app, and each function can be triggered by a different type of event or input. For example, you might have one function that is triggered by a HTTP request, another that is triggered by a message on the queue, or another that is triggered by a timer as shown in this slide. Once you have deployed your Azure function with multiple functions, you can manage and monitor each function separately using Azure portal or other monitoring tools. Some of different types of the triggers available with Azure functions are listed on the right hand side. A brief view about each trigger. Let's start from the top. HTTP trigger. Azure functions can be triggered by a HTTP request. This can be used to create REST APIs, webhooks, or integrate with other HTTP based functions. If you want to know more about webhooks, there is another separate video available in my channel. Please go ahead and visit that one. Second one, timer trigger. Functions can be scheduled to run on a timer based schedule using timer trigger. You can set the timer trigger to a function at a specific time or on a recurring schedule. Third one, queue trigger. Functions can be triggered by messages added to a queue, such as Azure Storage Queue or Azure Service Bus Queue. This trigger can be used to process messages as soon as they are added to the queue. Fourth one, Event Hub trigger. These Azure functions can be triggered by an Azure Event Hub, which is streaming data platform that can be used to ingest and process large amounts of data in real time. Fifth one, Cosmos DB trigger. Functions can be triggered by changes to data in an Azure Cosmos DB database, such as when a new document is added or uploaded. Sixth one, a blob storage trigger. Function can also be triggered by changes in the blob in an Azure blob storage container. Seventh one, IoT based hub trigger. These Azure function can be triggered by data received from an Azure IoT hub, which is Azure service that provides device to cloud or cloud to device messaging capabilities. Last one, custom triggers. User can write their own triggers to invoke an Azure function that is called as custom triggers. So these are the different means by which you can build and trigger an Azure function. Now, let's see the various steps involved in building Azure Function app. I'm going to use Azure Portal to create an Azure Function app first, and then let's create Azure Functions within the Azure Function app. So you need to launch your Azure Portal, log in it into Azure Portal using your subscription, just search for Function app, and then create a Azure Function app. Next come, you need to select a resource group. Within that selection of the resource group, you need to choose a unique function app name. Then you have a choice how do you want to publish that function, either as a direct code or using Docker container. Then you need to select the technology stack from the list available. And these are the technology stack that is currently supported. Upon technology selection, you need to specify which version of the technology that you are going to use it. Then you need to select the operating system of your choice where you would like to run your code, whether Windows or Linux. After the selection, you need to select the pricing plan type. There are three different types which we will see in detail in the succeeding slide. One is a consumption based one. Second one is a uh, uh, premium service plan. Third one is the app service plan. And then once the once this plan is selected, you are good to go for creating an Azure function. And let's see how to create an Azure function. So this is the first step you are completing to create a function app within which we are going to create multiple number of Azure functions. And that's what we are going to see in the next slide. So here what you have to do is you need to you need to start from the previous menu, that is in the Azure portal. Upon completion of Azure function of creation, go for selecting the function list, and from the functions list you just click for create function, and you need to select the development environment. which means what IDE that you will be using to develop your Azure function. It can be a Visual Studio Code or any editor of your choice or using the Azure portal itself. Then you can select the template using which you can create your code. There are multiple templates are available, and upon selection of the template, you need to enter the unique function name. Then you can choose the authentication level. It can be a function level authentication or anonymous or admin. And after choosing this, you can go and develop your function and then optimize the code, test it locally, and you can do triggering that one either using either Azure portal or using the URL which is created for an Azure function that can be triggered from outside. Like I mentioned, it can be a timer function or anything. And then you test your created function, and you can integrate the created function with various other tasks. It can be integrated with a web API or it can be integrated with many other application. You can monitor an Azure function performance using various monitoring mechanism, and also you can assign function keys to an Azure functions. That's it. Now let's see what are the different pricing plans which are available for Azure functions, which I referred in the previous slide. The number one is app service plan. You can choose this app service plan to run your Azure functions, Azure functions for any function that you can write it for web development or for mobile or API apps. No additional cost if an app service plan is which is already existing in your landscape and used for some other web application or mobile applications. You will not be charged any extra cost for that. However, the Azure function execution or invocation for which there are applicable charges will be there. Second one, consumption based plan. This may be right choice for many developers or for organization. Here, billing is based upon number of executions or the total execution time or the memory is used. Here, billing is aggregated across all functions within a function app. So you also have to note when your function runs, Azure provides all the necessary computational resources, right from memory to CPU and many more. You don't have to worry about the resource management and you only pay for the time that your code runs. When your app scales additional instances of the functions based upon the demand, it the cloud service provider automatically handle the load, scales up or scale down when your code is running. Here, every execution can use maximum up to 15 GB memory and one CPU. And always refer the documentation to get to know about these numbers. The last one is related to premium plan. This premium plan provide features such as premium compute resources, something like 1 core, 2 core, or 4 core instances. It is a kind of a predictable price and the ability to keep the instances warm at an indefinite period. It offers unlimited execution duration and VNet connectivity. In the premium plan, your plan size will determine the available memory and CPU for all apps that the plan on that instance. And so it is a right choice for Critical Azure functions are functions which require clear focus and need to be completed within a matter of fraction of few seconds. And in such case, go for premium plan. With that, let's get into a demo of Azure function app creation and within which creating Azure functions. In this demo, I will walk you through the way in which I mentioned the steps in the previous slides, and that will make you to understand things easily and start working on creating newer functions based upon your requirements. Now let's get into the demo. I logged it into my Azure portal. Here, upon logging it into my portal, I can search for Azure function app using create a resource. I'm just searching for function app. I can create a function app first. I should have to select the resource group. I already have a resource group. I need to provide a unique function name, all in lowercase. I need to decide whether it's a code or a Docker container. I am opting it for code, and I'm selecting my runtime stack as .NET, and I'm selecting the region as South India. I am opting for Windows operating system, and between the three different plans, I am opting for consumption based one, that is pay as you go model. And that's it. I have to review the code and publish it. Before that, if you are interested, you can provide a tag, hosting, networking, and other related information. Since it's a demo, I'm not providing any details. I am going ahead and then hitting the create button after reviewing all the information. So it is going to be for a demo purpose, so I'm not providing all other information. So it just initialize and the deployment is completed in a matter of few seconds. I can go to the resource or create a function directly. So I'm opting create a function, which is a straightforward one. I would like to stop here, and the reason I want to stop here is I opted the create function without going it into the resource type. So the difference between these two paths is by going it into the resource type, you can get to know about what are the other functions are all available as a list. And also you can choose the function security mechanism. If you are getting it into directly creating the function, which means that either you know what are the function already exist and you know what need to be newly created. And so I opted this path. So I'm going to create a new function. If you look here, I'm hitting the create option. This ensures I need to select which IDE I will be using it. I'm going to choose develop using the portal, that is Azure portal itself, and I can select a template. There are multiple templates are available if you see down below. I am opting for HTTP trigger. You can browse down and then see various options available. So I opted for HTTP and then selecting create. You can change the name of the trigger. I'm leaving it is by default as HTTP trigger 1. Now I have successfully created a trigger, and then it is time for me to code my function. I already opted for Azure portal as my IDE. So the default template is made available and presented to me. I can go ahead and change this template the way in which my business based upon my business requirement. Okay, I'm leaving this section as it is since it's a demo. What it does is it calls some namespaces and you can hit the test and run. Since it's a HTTP post, in the body I can change the input parameter like Azure world, and let me run that. When you run it, look out here, line number 27 to 30, a message like this HTTP is triggered, function is executed, and the response is hello Azure world. This is HTTP triggered function executed successfully. So this is how you can build the Azure function inside an Azure function app. You can code, test, and then run the application all in using Azure portal itself. You can monitor the Azure function using various monitoring mechanism. The one whatever down shown on the black box, you can connect to the application inside, using which you can do that. Other than that, you can integrate this Azure function based upon your requirement. Say for example, you can this HTTP trigger can trigger a function and it can provide an output, or based upon certain input you can trigger the function. Like I mentioned, you can monitor this Azure function using various logs which are all created, which are part of your Azure function. You can assign a function key, and this can be used for various purposes or for a quick access to the function. Okay, I'm not getting it into details about these three items: integration, monitor, and function keys. We will have a separate session on that one. And this is how you can create a function app within which you can create multiple function, host it, integrate it, and then use it for your various needs. And that's all with respect to Azure function app and Azure functions. Let me, with that, let me close this discussion. I hope this video is helpful to you for your learning, academic preparation, or for any exam or interview preparation. If you like this video, please go ahead and subscribe. There will be another video to test your knowledge, and I will be providing the link in the description. You can use that one and get into the another video where you can test the knowledge whatever you have acquired through this video presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and we will meet with a newer topic sometime tomorrow. Till then, stay safe and bye now.